Welcome to the Not Just a Pony Ride podcast, presented to you by Hetra University. If you've landed here, you're probably passionate about how horses help people. Whether you're an instructor, therapist, in the business, or have experienced equine assisted services yourself, we're glad you're here. Join us as we talk about the benefits, the science, to-dos, how-tos, and all of the reasons why what we do is so much more than just a pony ride. And now, from the Hetra campus in Gretna, Nebraska, here's your host, occupational therapist Katie King.
Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today is an interesting episode. I had John Levy from the William and Ruth Scott Foundation, and that is a local foundation here in Nebraska. And the reason we had him on today wasn't really so much that he could explain their foundation in particular, but that he could give us insight into how to get involved with foundations and really kind of how foundations operate, how they can be different and how they are alike. And he had so much awesome advice, really everything from, how to get involved, how to communicate with your foundations, important questions like what do you wish that organizations would know or do during the application process and that sort of thing. So he has some good advice for organizations with regards to funding as well. Really a good listen. So I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Enjoy. Thanks for joining me this morning, John.
You are welcome.
Well, why don't we kick it off and tell a little bit about you and what you do?
All right. So my name is John Levy. I work for the William and Ruth Scott Family Foundation. In my role, the Bill and Ruth are people who made their wealth through Berkshire Hathaway. They are in their early 90s now, and they have a goal of kind of giving away their money. And so I assist them finding nonprofits, different communities throughout Nebraska that would be a good investment. Bill and Ruth are pretty deferential, extremely humble individuals that value relationships. So a lot of my time is actually spent meeting with organizations, meeting with communities, really trying to build a genuine partnership to see how the family may be able to support their efforts. And so I, try to do homework ahead of time, which includes looking at budgets, looking at annual reports, looking at strategic plans, just to make sure that I'm making good use of the nonprofit's time. And after I have all that information, then we get together and hopefully have a transparent, honest, candid conversation.
Very good. So how did you end up in your position, John? What's your background?
Yeah, so I tell people I'm a reformed attorney. So I practiced law for a little over 5 years. After I finished practicing law, I ran a nonprofit in North Omaha. During that time, I had really the blessing and the pleasure of meeting John Scott. John managed the philanthropy for his parents from about 1998 until I joined in 2015. I always joke around and tell people that they were tired of me asking them for money, so they asked me to assist them with their efforts. And so I ran a nonprofit in North Omaha for about 5 years. And after that, I've been assisting the Scotts for the last 7.5.
Very good. So how many times a year do you guys gift funds, or what's your kind of rhythm, I guess, as far as finding organizations and funding?
Yeah, so we have 2 grant cycles, or I should say giving cycles. The foundation really kind of shies away from having an onerous grant application process. Instead, most of the organizations that receive funding receive general operating gifts. And those gifts are made during our late fall, early winter meeting. Lately, that meeting's been taking place in December. And then we have another meeting that takes place in May. We try to be flexible and responsive to nonprofits. So occasionally they need money outside of those cycles. And, we can definitely make exceptions if need be. But those operating gifts are happening every single, late fall, early winter. And then the May meeting will be primarily capital request, dollars for programming, things like that. So, and we tell organizations also too that you can either get a general operating gift or a program grant, but not both. Part of the rationale for that is we never want organizations to feel like they have to do some creative new program in order to get funding. We want them to feel comfortable with the fact that, hey, we're doing good work and we need someone to help us pay our utility bills, or we're doing good work and we need someone to help pay for an admin assistant. We think that's incredibly necessary. And so we want the organizations to have the ability to use the funds as they see fit, unless they decide, hey, we'd actually rather have a program gift or a program grant and have the money restricted for this particular purpose, then we can do that as well. We kind of let the nonprofits take the lead on which of those two avenues they want to go down.
Gosh, I can't thank you guys enough for taking that approach to it, because in what we do in our realm, we can have a tendency to just, create tons and tons of programs and, really get going on a lot of really important causes because there's so many people that we can reach all the time. But then it's the stuff that it takes to keep them going, right? The staff and like you said, keeping the lights on and all that stuff so that we can run those important programs. So that's incredible. Thank you very much. What makes you a different foundation than some of the other foundations that are out there? I think we have a lot of our listeners right now might be listening to hear about, what can help them as far as foundations in their own cities and own regions. What makes you guys different from other foundations or similar?
Yeah, what I would say, the first comment, and this is going to be kind of seem like I'm not answering it, but every foundation's different. The reason being is we all have different donors. And to me, the most important thing is donor intent. This is not my money. This is Bill and Ruth's money. So we're honoring how they would want their money to be used. So knowing that I have donors that have kind of set up a process that's not intended to be punitive or not intended to be transactional. Instead, it is, let's build an honest, transparent relationship. And so tell us what's going on so we can figure out how we can help. It's not going to be one of these, craft a nice 3 or 4 page answer to every question we ask you. And you must achieve certain outcomes or certain outputs. Otherwise, you're going to lose your funding. It's intended to be much more of a, hey, we're going to be there for you today. We're going to be there for you tomorrow, as long as you meet some basic requirements. One of those being communicate with us. As I said, we're extremely blessed. There can be a big difference in having a living donor or living donors in our case, and a donor who is no longer alive, or maybe a corporate donor. At any point in time, I can pick up the phone and see, how Bill or Ruth stand on a particular issue, or I can talk to one of their sons and say, hey, how do they feel about this? And so that allows us to be, much quicker in how we act. We don't have to rely as heavily on a board of trustees in trying to decipher what is or interpret what is donor intent. Instead, we can talk to our donors directly. So having living donors allows us that freedom to have those conversations, because truthfully, I'm not going to waste an organization's time if it's not a fit, or I'm going to tell them flat out it's not a fit. And the reason I know it's not a fit is because I talk to their son, John, quite frequently. And I also talk to Bill and Ruth myself as well. And so having that kind of guidance allows us, I guess, to be, we don't have a lot of bureaucracy. We're just very upfront right from the beginning.
That makes sense. So coming from an organization standpoint, what do you think is the best way to start getting involved with your foundation, or to determine, I guess, if that's a good fit? So, I mean, I'm assuming you do a lot of education through your website or through other means too, but what's the best first step to determining if it might be a good fit?
Yeah. So we're a little bit different. There's no website, for example. It's hard to find a lot of information. I would say just reach out. Reach out and ask for a meeting. I will take a meeting with any nonprofit. I remember how hard it was to ask to meet with people. So I'll meet with any nonprofit. Now, I'll also be honest with them. Let's say someplace in South Carolina or even a place in Iowa or Kansas requests a meeting, I'm going to tell them, look, the Scott Family Foundation funds Nebraska nonprofits. And so I'm going to tell them so they can decide if they think it's a good use of their time, knowing that funding's not there. But I think when you have that meeting, go in open-minded. Go in there to really learn about the Scotts and what their philanthropic priorities are. In the same way, I'm trying to go in open-minded and learn about, every organization. So take, where you work at Hetra, for example, I'm not going to assume every horse organization that works with horses is the exact same. They can be very different in what they're trying to accomplish, who their clients or their patients might be. And so I want to take the time to get to know the organization, and I hope that they take the time to get to know us. Otherwise, it just kind of seems cheapened. And it seems like that you really view the foundation as an ATM.
Right. So what do you think is the best way for organizations to prepare for a meeting like that? What kinds of things are you looking to learn, maybe more specifically about organizations?
Yeah, I think the best meetings I've had with nonprofits is not actually the real slick development director that comes in, that has all the great answers. It's actually the people that come in and own their challenges. Because to me, no one's perfect. No organization is perfect. And so I frequently say, if you tell me that your organization has no challenges, tells me one of two things. One, you're too stupid to realize that your organization has challenges. Or two, and even worse, you think I'm too stupid to realize your organization has challenges. So I don't think that, like, when I'm meeting with a nonprofit, I'm not going to quiz you on, okay, what was your income in 2019? What percentage of your budget comes from foundation grants? How many people did you serve 3 years ago versus 2 years ago? I'm just looking like, let you get to know us and we'll get to know you. And let's talk about some big picture things. I'm probably going to ask you, do you have a functioning board of directors? Do you, when you set your budget, do you have a finance committee that looks at it? Just more basic questions, but it's not intended to be a pop quiz or like, aha, I caught you and you don't know this information, so now you have no chance for us. I hope, I look at it as an interview both ways. So you have a chance to interview us too, to see, because not every foundation is a good fit, or, there's certain foundations that they might give you money and you might feel like it's really prescriptive or heavy-handed, so you don't want it ultimately. Mm-hmm. And so I want organizations to be able to look at whether they even want to pursue a funding relationship with us.
So when, let's say you have this meeting and the organization decides that it would be a good fit, they decide to apply.
Yeah.
What do you wish that organizations would do before they start the application process, or before they, request funding from you? What's something you wish that organizations would do or know?
Yeah, so we don't have a formal application process. Actually, the ones that get that unrestricted general operating gift, their only requirement is to meet with me. Cool. So what I wish that more of them did is, I see a lot of times the Scotts have this tremendous wealth, but I see people just putting all their eggs in one basket, right? Or they're going what some people say, whale hunting. So rather than spending any time to develop other funding relationships, or to, pursue the $100, the $250, the $500, the $1,000, whatever, your organization's smaller donors are, instead of building those up, they're instead just hoping that the Scotts give them all the money. So to me, when organizations are applying, and they do apply when they're looking for capital dollars or for program dollars, I would hope that it wouldn't just be like that their whole fundraising plan is, well, we are just going to ask you and the other 4 usual suspects. I would hope that they would instead try to build a broader base of support.
Mm-hmm. Because you see that question on other grant applications often too, is who are your other funders, and that type of thing. And sometimes I think it feels like, well, do they want to know because they're not going to fund us if we have a bunch of other funders? Or is it coming from more of a standpoint like you are, John, saying that, are they exploring other opportunities to help build that?
Yeah. Look, I look at it differently. If you have great fundraising success from others, we're not going to penalize you. In fact, we'll probably give you more, because we also know that you're not going to become dependent solely on us. When you build that good base of support, we know that others are likewise seeing that you're sustainable. And, the Scots have a sunset clause, meaning eventually, all their money will be spent down, so they won't exist. And if you only exist because the Scots are giving you money, we don't want that either, because presumably your work needs to continue past the Scots well. On top of that, it's hard for an organization to tell me that I have a stupid idea, which I have plenty of, when the Scots are, your significant donor source and you don't have anyone else. I think some are just leery to give us that honest feedback.
Right. And I think sustainability is always the key to everything, to keeping your organization going, but also really what funders want to see too, is how does this program continue even if you don't have this funding?
Exactly.
Have you heard about Hetra's mentoring program? 30 years ago, Hetra started with one participant and a handful of volunteers. Today, we're a large, thriving organization that wants to share our experience with you. We know that the work you're doing is extremely beneficial, but we also know how incredibly difficult it can be. Let us help you understand all aspects of your program, from volunteer coordination, horse management, finances, fundraising, and everything in between, so that you can sustain a successful, thriving organization. Get started now with a free 15-minute consultation. All you have to do is a quick survey, and we'll match you with the best Hetra staff member for your needs. Go to hetrauniversity.org now and click on mentoring. You mentioned that kind of the best way to build that relationship, I guess, and that support is to continue communication and open communication, right? So what do you think is the best way to communicate with the foundation, and, kind of how often should that be happening?
I leave it to the nonprofits to decide how often that they want to communicate with us. We just say, if you have major happenings with your organization, let us hear that from you. For example, if your executive director is leaving, don't let us find that out from the news. Or if you're merging with another nonprofit, don't let us find that out from the news. So a lot of times, one time a year, for a formal face-to-face is enough. A lot of organizations will follow up, at another point in time in the year and just say, here's what our budget looks like right now. Our annual fundraiser went really well. We're serving more people than we wanted to. Some kind of somewhat personalized note that they're giving us, as well as some of their other major donors. But we don't want it to become, it's like, oh, geez, we haven't touched base for 2 weeks. We better call or email the Scots, with an update. So just really major happenings and anything that you think we should be aware of, and that will help your cause in trying to secure additional dollars too.
So how many, generally speaking, do you guys fund several organizations throughout the year? I'm just thinking in regards to if there was, how many nonprofits in even in the Omaha area requesting meetings or things with you all the time, you probably stay busy. So how do you handle that?
Yeah, so I meet with about 1,000 nonprofits a year. Now, that number started to go down a little bit recently because, frankly, a lot of the nonprofits that exist, we know they're out there. And if it's a fit, it's a fit. If it's not a fit, it's not a fit. But so that number started to go down. But I'll visit around 50 communities in greater Nebraska on top of that. The foundation, on our operating gift list, there's about 120 organizations on that list. Those gift size range in, I want to say the small ones are $5,000. The large ones are $500,000. And like I said, that's just an annual meeting. Now, some nonprofits want to meet more frequently. So, I kind of am pretty deferential to what other people want. If they see a need to meet. Now, if you're asking for a meeting every 3 weeks, I'm going to say, do you really need to meet with me that often? My wife doesn't even want to talk to me that often. So I don't know if any nonprofit really wants to meet with me that frequently.
So you said that you have some nonprofits that just aren't a good fit, or you kind of decide that mutually that's not a good fit. What about, do you ever have nonprofits that want to try and make it a better fit, or maybe make some changes, or want to keep trying, I guess, in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, and I appreciate those efforts, right? Like when they're like, no doesn't mean no. But it does sometimes, unfortunately. And that's the reason is because there's so many great causes out there. I mean, I don't see people with bad causes. And so the foundation has to prioritize what efforts are going to go into. So if you're an arts-based organization, arts are wonderful. There's nothing against the arts, but the foundation's not going to fund it. If you're an individual private school, once again, I went to individual private schools. There's nothing wrong with individual private schools. The Scotts have some of their grandkids and great grandkids that went to individual or go to individual private schools. It's just not a fit for the foundation. And so some will try to keep on, but honestly, I wish that they would instead see who their closest stakeholders are, and potential donors, and invest more time there with those donors, as opposed to kind of trying to wiggle their way in or change their programming so it would be a fit for the Scotts.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Cultivating who they are and kind of other supporters through who staying true to their organization.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say? Would you say that maybe that is the biggest mistake that organizations could make when seeking funding from your foundation, or even foundations kind of speaking more globally? You have great experience as a nonprofit owner yourself. So what do you think is the biggest mistake that organizations might make in regards to seeking funding from foundations?
Yeah, I think some of them chase the money, right? They develop a program because there's a grant available. And I would ask the organization, do you really want to do that work? And that's how mission creep happens. I think some organizations also want to grow for just growth's sake. And a lot of the best organizations I see are small organizations. So I think that there's this pressure to grow and grow and grow. And I don't think that's particularly helpful. Or accepting a program grant, overly restrictive grant dollars, same way. Like, to me, when I ran a nonprofit, I wanted unrestricted dollars because we knew how we needed to use those dollars. And I would much rather any day of the week, if you told me tomorrow, hey, John, you can run a nonprofit that has a $500,000 operating budget, and it's all from unrestricted money, versus an organization with $10 million where half of the money is overly restrictive program grants, I would say no. I'd much rather run the small organization. I just think having that flexibility allows you to do what you want to do. And I think oftentimes organizations look at their success based on, their budget size. Mm-hmm. And to me, sometimes it can be a blessing not to get the money, because it would put too many tax your resources in a way that you don't want to, because you don't have the ability to cover your overhead, which I will also say, I think overhead should be much higher than what nonprofits account for. To me, having low overhead means that you might not be paying your staff well, or might be cutting corners elsewhere.
Right. And I think that's such important advice, especially in our realm of business, because our overhead is obviously large with the horses and hay, and all the kind of other expenses that we have. But then also that there's so many centers that are, either startup centers, or they're, smaller, and they have, a handful of horses, and they can do really, really good work and do great things, and not have to just keep, like you said, seeking those other programs and more grants that are more specific. And I think that being small can be really, really good too.
Yeah.
So what is your best advice to an organization that has not been funded by a foundation before? What's your advice for them to get out there and seek a good foundation?
I would say spend the time to really look at your budget and say, what do we truly need? and not just your budget, but your whole infrastructure. I think, a lot of times really well-meaning people come to us and they tell us about how important their mission is. But truth be told, I have yet to see a bad mission out there. No one has asked the Scotts to give them money to traffic drugs or babies. And so because of that, I think it's being very intentional in your growth and saying, well, geez, I might want these dollars, but why do we need these dollars? And I think sometimes people just celebrate, we got a $50,000 grant or $100,000 grant or $1 million grant, but they never really thought, how does this further our work and what we're trying to ultimately accomplish? And so I would look at it really hard, because then that can kind of change the game a little bit. Because I even remember for the nonprofit I ran, we would get approached by some foundations. Hey, you haven't asked us for money lately. And that was intentional, because we didn't know if they were a good fit for us. Mm-hmm. So we just didn't want to take money for the sake of taking money. So I would tell organizations, really look at your budget and see what you need, and where you want to be, and how does this further your mission.
And if an organization wanted to start to really look at that process more methodically, who do you think should be involved from an organizational standpoint in deciding about that budget or what you really need?
Yeah, I think it's a combination. To me, depending on the size of the organization, the staff should have a huge part, because they're the ones running the day-to-day operations, the programming piece. The board's ultimately, providing fiscal management and fiscal oversight, so they should be involved. But I think it should be a combination of really staff leadership and board leadership. I don't think you need every single person involved from the staff. I think, if you have too many people involved, then you're not going to make any progress either. So I think it's figuring out a couple of key people in both. If you have a program director, have the program director as well as the executive director, as well as maybe your treasurer on your board or whoever's chairing your finance committee, and another person. But you don't also need to get in the weeds because it can get a little awkward if you have board members making less than staff, because then you'll have board members that are pushing for, we don't really need to be paying this, just because they know what they themselves make. And that might not be a fair number either.
Right. And you don't ever want to have too many cooks in the kitchen, because you're right. You don't get very far with too many opinions.
Yeah.
So kind of on the flip side of that, so kind of budgeting and forecasting ahead of the time before you apply. So say you apply, you get funding, then what happens on the back end? Do you require some kind of reporting process on how you use the funds and that sort of thing?
Just meet with me next year. Schedule that meeting. Mm-hmm. And then before we meet, I'm going to ask you to send me, a few documents just so I can make sure I'm prepared, so I make good use of your time.
Right.
But yeah, the money's unrestricted, so you can decide yourselves how you want to do it or use it.
Very good. Well, as we sort of wrap up here, I always end my podcast with one question. And that is, why do you keep doing what you do for the Scott Foundation, John?
Yeah. So I end up finding myself in maybe the most privileged position that a person could. I see this tremendous generosity of the Scott family, right? And just wanting to do good. And then I see this tremendous generosity in the nonprofits and wanting to just do good. And so I'm the ultimate observer. Mm-hmm. And I'm just trying to play matchmaker with this generosity of the wealth, with the generosity of the time and the dedication of the nonprofits. And so I do what I do because, frankly, I love it and I feel privileged to be able to do it. And there's not many families like the Scotts. And if there's a family that wants to do good like they do, I want to support that. And so I feel this privilege, but also this responsibility in making sure that their money is well spent and well invested.
Gosh, that's the way you describe that, is you just see so much good all the time. That's fantastic. Yeah. What a great place to find yourself in.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for meeting with me today. I really learned so much about foundations, and I think that our listeners will as well, and just the good work that can happen and that's available. And I would just encourage anybody that's listening to seek foundations in your own area. John, would you have any other takeaway kind of advice?
I think that is exactly what I would say.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule today.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to another episode. Until the next one launches, stay connected to our community by joining the Not Just a Pony Ride Facebook group. There, we share exclusive educational content, answer your questions, and review new and exciting developments for the EAS community. Don't forget, if you have suggestions for future episode topics or a lead on a great guest that you think our audience would enjoy, click on the link in the show notes or visit us at hetrauniversity.org. This podcast is presented by Hetra University, an educational arm of the Heartland Equine Therapeutic Riding Academy. Hetra University's mission is to provide high-quality educational offerings to our participants and the EAS community. If you'd like to help us work toward our mission, you can make a donation by visiting us online at hetra.org. Again, I can't thank you all enough for helping Hetra change lives one stride at a time.